Picture this: a 24-year-old man, barely more than skin and bones, standing on an 8-foot wooden raft in the middle of the endless Atlantic Ocean. In his hands, a metal water container. Circling beneath him, snapping its razor-sharp teeth. A hungry shark that could end his life in one bite. Most people would freeze. Most people would pray. Poon Lim grabbed that container and started swinging. What happened next defies everything we think we know about human survival. This humble mess. Stewart didn't just fight off death once. He battled it every single day for 4 months and 13 days straight, alone on the open sea. Hi everyone, Alex Reed here. When I first heard about Poon Lim's story, I couldn't believe it. 133 days. That's more than 4 months floating on a piece of wood smaller than most people's bedrooms, with nothing but his bare hands and an unbreakable will to live. But here's what really gets me. This wasn't some trained Navy SEAL or survival expert. This was just a regular guy doing his job when everything went wrong. Which makes me wonder, if you were thrown into the middle of the ocean tomorrow, would you have what it takes to survive even one day? 1942 was a deadly year to be anywhere near the Atlantic Ocean. German U-boats prowled beneath the surface like mechanical sharks, hunting Allied ships with ruthless precision. They'd already sent hundreds of vessels to the ocean floor, taking thousands of sailors. Down with them. The sea itself had become a graveyard. But for Pun Lim, the ocean wasn't just a battlefield, it was home. Born on Hainan Island off the coast of China in 1918, he'd spent his childhood learning to read the water's moods, understanding its currents, respecting its power. His father taught him that the sea could be your greatest enemy, or your most generous provider. You just had to know how to ask. When Japan began its brutal occupation of China in the 1930s, Lim's father made a heartbreaking decision. Rather than watch his son be forced into military service and almost certain death, he sent the young man away to find safety elsewhere. Lim found that safety, at least temporarily, with the British Merchant Navy. By 1942, he'd worked his way up to second mess steward aboard the SS Ben Lomond, a cargo ship that transported supplies across the most dangerous waters in the world. The Ben Lomond wasn't much to look at. She was slow, lightly armed, and sailed without escort through U-boat-infested waters. But she was Lim's livelihood, and more importantly, she was supposed to be his ticket to a better life. Every morning, Lim would wake up in his small cabin, put on his steward's uniform, and go about his duties, serving meals, cleaning quarters, maintaining the ship's daily operations. It was honest work, steady work, the kind of routine that lets a man plan for the future. He had no idea that future was about to be measured not in years, but in days, not in comfort, but in a fight for every breath, every drop of water, every scrap of food he could pull from the unforgiving sea. Because on November 23, 1942, the SS Ben Lomond would cross paths with something far more dangerous than bad weather or rough seas. She would meet the German submarine U-172. November 23, 1942. Middle of the South Atlantic. The SS Ben Lomond was making decent time toward New York when her lookouts spotted something that made their blood run cold. The sleek, predatory silhouette of a German U-boat cutting through the water. U-172 had been hunting in these waters for weeks, and Captain Mertens wasn't about to let a fat, slow cargo ship slip through his fingers. Lim was in his cabin when the first torpedo struck. The explosion threw him against the wall with such force that for a moment he couldn't tell up from down. Emergency bells started screaming throughout the ship. Men were shouting, running, trying to make sense of the chaos. He grabbed his life jacket and ran toward his assigned station, but there wasn't time. The second torpedo hit before most of the crew even knew they were under attack. The Ben Lomond, all 3,000 tons of her, began to die. 2 minutes. That's all the time they had between the first torpedo and when the ship disappeared beneath the waves. 2 minutes to grab what you could, say your prayers, and hope the ocean would be merciful. Lim made it to the boat deck where 2 officers and a seaman were frantically trying to launch a lifeboat that had gotten stuck in its chocks. He ran to help them, but just as they freed the boat, a massive wave swept across the deck and carried Lim overboard. The last thing he saw before hitting the water was his shipmates sailing away in that lifeboat, getting smaller and smaller until they vanished completely. When Lim surfaced, gasping and choking on seawater, the Ben Lomond was already gone. Just like that, as if a ship carrying 52 souls had never existed at all. But something else caught his eye through the wreckage and oil slick. The German submarine, sitting on the surface like a steel whale. The crew was watching him, pointing and laughing as if his struggle for life was nothing more than entertainment. Then they submerged and disappeared, leaving Lim completely alone in the vast Atlantic. For 2 hours, he floated among the debris, clinging to a wooden plank and waiting to die. Then, through the haze of exhaustion and despair, he spotted salvation, a wooden life raft, 8 feet square, bobbing in the distance. When he hauled himself onto that raft, Lim took inventory of his new world. A few tins of chocolate, some sugar cubes, hardtack biscuits, pemmican, a jug containing maybe 10 gallons of water. Enough food and water to last a careful man about a week. The problem was, Lim could see no land, no ships, no hope of rescue anywhere on the horizon. Just endless blue water stretching to the edge of the world. So he made a decision that would save his life. He wasn't going to count on being rescued. He was going to learn to live on the ocean. First, he tackled the water problem. Using the canvas from his life jacket, he created a funnel system to catch rainwater when storms passed overhead. But rain in the South Atlantic was unpredictable, so he needed backup options. From his childhood on Hainan Island, Lim remembered fishermen talking about drinking turtle blood when fresh water ran out. It sounded disgusting, but disgusting was better than dead. Next came food. He tore apart a hemp rope to create fishing line, mashed up hardtack for bait, and carefully removed the tiny spring from his flashlight to bend into a fishhook. His first attempts were clumsy, but gradually he started pulling small fish out of the water. Small fish, however, weren't going to sustain him for months. So Lim pried a nail from the raft's wooden planking and bent it into a larger, stronger hook. Now he could use the small fish as bait to catch bigger ones. But the ocean had other inhabitants, and they'd noticed the smell of fish blood in the water. The first time Lim saw dark shapes circling beneath his raft, his heart nearly stopped. Sharks. Multiple sharks, drawn by the scent of his fishing success. Most people would have stopped fishing immediately, but Lim realized something crucial. Those sharks represented hundreds of pounds of meat and gallons of blood. If he could somehow catch one, it would keep him alive for weeks. Using bird guts as bait, he dropped his strongest line into the water and waited. When a shark finally took the bait, Lim wrapped the line around his canvas-covered hands and began what would become the fight of his life. The shark thrashed and pulled with incredible force, nearly dragging him off the raft multiple times. But Lim held on slowly, agonizingly hauling the predator up onto his tiny platform. That's when the real battle began. The moment that shark hit the raft, it went berserk, snapping its jaws, whipping its tail, trying to tear apart anything within reach. Lim grabbed the only weapon he could find, his metal water container. Again and again, he brought it down on the shark's head until finally, mercifully, it stopped moving. He'd just defeated one of the ocean's apex predators with nothing but a water jug and determination. But killing the shark was only the beginning. Lim cut open its liver and drank the blood directly, knowing it would keep him hydrated for days. He carved up the meat, soaked it in seawater for salt, and dried it in the sun to create jerky. Nothing went to waste. Nothing could go to waste. Over the next 4 months, Lim would repeat this process dozens of times, catching birds that landed on his raft, battling storms that tried to wash away his supplies, maintaining a daily routine that kept his mind sharp, even as his body withered away. But perhaps the cruelest torture was hope itself. 3 different times, rescue came within shouting distance. A freighter passed so close that Lim could see sailors looking at him from the deck, but they sailed on without stopping. A U.S. Navy plane spotted him and dropped a rescue buoy, but a storm carried it away before he could reach it. Other ships came close enough that he could yell to them in perfect English, but they kept moving. Lim began to suspect why. An Asian man, floating alone in the middle of a war zone? Some captains probably assumed he was Japanese, an enemy. Others might have feared a trap, thinking German U-boats were using fake survivors as bait to lure in Allied ships. Either way, the result was the same. Day after day, week after week, month after month, Poon Lim remained completely alone on the endless sea. Here's what most people don't understand about survival at sea. It's not the dramatic moments that kill you. It's not the sharks or the storms or even the starvation. It's the slow, methodical breakdown of everything that makes you human. After just 3 days without fresh water, your body begins to consume itself. Your blood thickens. Your organs start shutting down. Your brain, desperate to keep functioning, begins playing tricks on you, showing you rescue ships that don't exist, offering you conversations with people who died weeks ago. Poon Lim survived because he understood something that medical science is only now beginning to appreciate. The human body can endure almost anything if the human mind refuses to surrender. Every morning, Lim forced himself to follow the same routine. Check his water supply, inspect his fishing equipment, scan the horizon for ships or land, speak out loud to keep his voice working, sing songs to keep his memory sharp. These weren't random activities. They were a deliberate strategy to maintain his sanity. The blood from shark livers kept him hydrated because it contains almost no salt, unlike seawater, which would have killed him within days. The bird meat provided essential proteins his body couldn't manufacture on its own. Even his makeshift clothing, that rough sack he fashioned into a skirt, protected his skin from developing the kinds of sores that become infected and deadly in a saltwater environment. But perhaps, most importantly, Lim's childhood on Hainan Island had taught him to see the ocean not as an enemy, but as a partner. Where others saw endless blue death, he saw a complex ecosystem full of opportunities. Rain clouds meant fresh water. Circling birds meant fish below. Changes in water color meant he was approaching land. This knowledge came from generations of fishermen who had learned to read the sea like a book. Without it, Lim would have died in his first week. But there's another reason Poon Lim spent 133 days alone on that raft, and it has nothing to do with survival skills. It has to do with war. By 1942, German U-boats had sunk over 3,000 Allied ships in the Atlantic. Merchant sailors had the most dangerous job in the entire war. More dangerous than infantry, more dangerous than bomber crews, more dangerous than anything. 1 in 4 merchant sailors never made it home. Ship captains had standing orders. Don't stop for survivors unless you're absolutely certain they're legitimate. German submarines had started using fake distress calls and planted survivors to lure in rescue vessels. One moment of compassion could cost you your entire crew. At the same time, racial prejudice was still rampant throughout the Allied navies. Chinese sailors were paid 1/3 of what their British counterparts earned, were denied death benefits for their families, and were often treated as disposable labor rather than essential crew members. When those passing ships saw an Asian man alone on a raft in the middle of the war zone, many captains probably made a split-second calculation. Japanese spy, German trap, or just someone not worth the risk of stopping for. This wasn't unique to Poon Lim's case. Records show that hundreds of survivors from sunken merchant vessels were left to die by passing ships during World War II. The ocean became not just a battlefield, but a place where human compassion went to die. Of the 52 men aboard the SS Ben Lomond that November morning, 51 would never see home again. Captain John Mall, 8 gunners, and 43 officers and crew members all perished when those German torpedoes found their mark. Only Poon Lim lived to tell their story. But his survival came at a cost that goes far beyond the 20 pounds he lost, or the months of physical agony he endured. It came at the cost of watching civilization sail past him again and again, choosing to let him die rather than risk their own safety. In the end, it wasn't the ocean that nearly killed Poon Lim. It was other people. April 5, 1943. After drifting 750 miles across the South Atlantic, Poon Lim finally saw what he'd been praying for: 3 Brazilian fishermen approaching his raft. But when they pulled him aboard their boat, they found something that barely looked human. Lim had lost 20 pounds from an already small frame. His skin was burned black from months under the sun. He was so weak he couldn't stand, couldn't walk, could barely speak above a whisper. Yet somehow, after just 3 days of care from those fishermen, he walked off their boat onto dry land in Belém, Brazil. 3 days. After 133 days of hell, it took him just 3 days to remember how to be human again. The world couldn't get enough of Poon Lim's story. Newspapers across 3 continents ran headlines about the Chinese steward who'd defeated death itself. When he finally made it to New York, King George VI awarded him the British Empire Medal for his extraordinary courage and resourcefulness. But here's what makes this story truly remarkable. The Royal Navy didn't just celebrate Poon Lim. They studied him. Every technique he'd used to survive was incorporated into official training manuals. His innovations with fishing hooks, water collection, shelter construction, and psychological maintenance became required learning for British sailors. A humble mess steward had literally rewritten the book on ocean survival. After the war ended, Lim faced a new challenge. He wanted to start fresh, in America, but immigration quotas had already been filled for Chinese nationals. That's when Senator Warren Magnuson stepped in, pushing through special legislation that granted Lim U.S. citizenship in recognition of his extraordinary service during the war. In 1952, he married the daughter of a former shipmate and settled in Brooklyn, New York, where he raised 4 children and worked for the United States Lines until retiring as chief steward in 1983. But perhaps the most ironic twist in this whole saga? When Lim applied to join the U.S. Navy, the same man who'd survived 133 days alone at sea, who'd fought sharks with his bare hands, who'd literally rewritten military survival training, they rejected his application. When people learned that Poon Lim held the world record for survival time alone on a life raft, they congratulated him on his achievement. His response tells you everything you need to know about the man who'd stared death in the face for 4 months and refused to blink. He said, "I hope no one will ever have to break that record." Even after everything he'd endured, even after proving that the human spirit can overcome impossible odds, Poon Lim's greatest wish was that no one else would ever have to suffer what he'd suffered. That, to me, is the real lesson here. It's not about the fishing techniques or the water collection, or even the incredible physical endurance. It's about what happens to a person when everything civilized gets stripped away, when you're reduced to your most basic elements, when survival becomes your only job. Some people break. Some people give up. Some people let the darkness win. But some people, rare people like Poon Lim, discover that there's something unbreakable deep inside the human heart. Something that refuses to quit, even when quitting would be so much easier than fighting for one more day, one more breath, one more chance to see the sun rise again. The ocean tried to kill Poon Lim. War tried to kill him. Prejudice tried to kill him. Despair tried to kill him every single morning for 133 days straight. But he kept getting up. He kept fishing. He kept hoping. He kept believing that somewhere beyond that endless horizon there was still a world worth living in. And you know what? He was right. Poon Lim passed away peacefully in Brooklyn on January 4, 1991, at the age of 72. He'd lived almost half-century beyond that terrible year when the world tried its best to kill him. But his record still stands. As of today, no one has survived longer alone on a life raft at sea. And just like Poon Lim hoped, maybe no one ever will. I'm Alex Reed, and this has been Real Dark Cases.